During a recent Fox News panel, liberal commentator Jessica Tarlov triggered not only her Republican opponent, but also the blatantly conservative moderator when she fact-checked them about Donald Trump's weakness with women and his attacks against Jewish Americans. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as you know, we are huge fans of Jessica Tarlov here on this channel. We are the unofficial Jessica Tarlov fan club. And given that the election is rapidly approaching and the polls show that it is tightening, Donald Trump could win this election. This has gone from, a slight Harris lead to an even slighter Harris lead. This is effectively a coin toss election, something we need to remain vigilant about. But before I play the clip, I do want to remind you, somebody who does not like Jessica Tarlov and is now repeatedly calling her out by name is the leader of the Republican Party, Donald Trump. So he said this recently on Truth Social, actually yesterday. How much time does Ian Sam, senior advisor to Lion Kamala Harris, spend on Fox News? He's now on Cavuto, Fox's lowest rated show by far, and spent much of the weekend hitting Trump totally unopposed before two real beauties, Eric Shawn and Arthel Neville, not exactly the next Walter Cronkite of the broadcasting world. Sam's is just below an average guy with memorized fake news sound bites, almost all of which are wrong, but coupled with all of the other Harris radical left Democrat mouthpieces that Fox puts on. This is where he mentions Jessica, Richard Fowler, Patrick Murphy, Something Wolf, Jessica Tarlov. It has a very negative effect on the election. So according to Donald Trump, Jessica Tarlov is someone to be feared. And every time she's on Fox, she has a negative outcome for Trump on the election. And I hope he's right. And so with that in mind, I want to play you this clip because this is not of the five, right? That's the show that Jessica Tarlov usually appears as the token liberal on the five. She's outnumbered 4-1. She kicks their butts anyway. She was actually, I think it was The Story, hosted by Martha MacCallum, who, by the way, is not just a conservative moderator, but somebody that Fox proposed moderate a debate between Trump and Vice President Harris, and Trump categorically rejected it because he thinks that Martha MacCallum is not biased in his favor enough. So keep that in mind with what you're about to see. One of the people who freaks out in this panel and comes to Trump's defense, just reflexively, Trump sees as insufficiently loyal. Keep that in mind. With that in mind, here's the clip of Jessica Tarlov triggering both her opponent and the host, Martha MacCallum.
These are issues that affect all
I think
Americans.
that people are tired of hearing about themselves as voters in boxes.
Yes.
And I think that is why, people just are sort of repelled by it. And when you ask, and I have asked former President Trump about women voters, he says, I think they like a good economy just as much as everybody else.
Yeah, but they don't like him. He has a historic gender gap. I mean, Republicans typically don't do as well with women. This is beyond anything we've seen before. And you say he doesn't talk to people like they're in boxes. Roll the tape of him talking to Jews and how he says this is going to be your fault if I lose. Creating a dual identity, a dual loyalty issue for us. If you support Israel, you can't possibly vote for the Democrats. Calling Doug Emhoff a crappy Jew.
Well, isn't that what Biden did when he said, if you don't support me, you ain't black?
First of all, Joe Biden is not on this ticket. And that's the thing. This is a completely different race.
Trump has not only a Jewish daughter, but a Jewish son-in-law and Jewish grandchildren.
Is that like I don't think
that's I don't think it's appropriate, and I don't think it's kind of relevant to the conversation.
Really? You just said identity politics doesn't work, and Donald Trump stands up there and he said,
identity politics.
Yeah, really, people do not want to be siloed into
you
boxes.
You can also ask whether or not that's a foreign policy issue. It's a question of whether or not you support it.
As a Jew, we heard him loud and clear about this, and he has lost support from a lot of Jewish donors.
Right. So again, I love how reflexively she can't help herself, Martha MacCallum. She's like, no, I got to defend Trump. Well, what about Biden? And Jessica Tarlov is just, she's too good for MacCallum. Biden's not on the ticket. You might have a point. Might. That's being overly generous. If Joe Biden were the Democratic nominee, but he's not. Vice President Harris is. And you're also talking about comments that Biden made once 5 years ago. Okay. We're talking about comments that Trump has made repeatedly within the past few weeks or months. Wildly asymmetrical. Trump has made many more egregiously bad comments, and he's made them much more frequently. Donald Trump is objectively worse than Joe Biden when it comes to playing race-based or identity politics. And again, Biden isn't even the nominee. Jessica Tarlov is talking about are all the comments that Donald Trump has made about Jewish Americans and Jewish American voters. Okay, just to give you a snapshot. This is from CBS News. Former President Donald Trump criticized Jewish Americans who don't vote for him in speeches, plural, aimed at addressing anti-Semitism Thursday night in Washington, D.C., while claiming if he's not elected in November, Israel would, quote, be eradicated. Quote, if I don't win this election, and the Jewish people would really have a lot to do with that if that happens, because at 40%, that means 60% of the people are voting for the enemy, the Democratic Party, according to Trump. Trump said, Trump made the comments during a small event focused on addressing anti-Semitism with Dr. Miriam Adelson, a prominent Republican Party donor and the widow of late casino magnate Sheldon Adelson. Quote, with all I've done for Israel, I received only 24% of the Jewish vote, Trump said. Trump later repeated the comment regarding the polls during remarks at the Israeli-American Council National Summit, which was gathering to commemorate the nearing 1 year mark of the October 7th attack. Quote, you should have your head examined because it will face an unceasing bloody war to obliterate the Jewish state and drive Jews out of the Holy Land, Trump said about Jewish Americans who vote for Democrats. He claimed at his first stop that Democrats have a, quote, hold or curse on Jewish voters. Quote, it's only because of the Democrat hold or curse on you. You can't let this happen. 40% is not acceptable because we have an election to win. This is the culmination of comments that Trump has made for months about Jewish Americans. Again, objectively worse and objectively more egregious and objectively more frequent than comments that President Biden made 5 years ago. This is what I mean, though, where Martha MacCallum, she's supposed to be a straight news journalist, right? But she's so biased towards Trump, she just reflexively feels the need to throw in a whataboutism, which I suppose is fine if you're trying to demonstrate hypocrisy, but it's not even a really valid whataboutism because it concerns somebody who's not Trump's rival. And it doesn't change the fact that Trump is objectively worse. And then, of course, Tarlov also triggered her rival, a Republican surrogate, panelist there who's like, well, Donald Trump can say these things about American Jews because he's got Jewish family members. That's insane. That is insane. We would never accept that in any other circumstance or any other demonstration of bigotry. A racist who says terrible things about black people can't just simply appeal to the fact that he has a black family member or black friend, right? Of course not. Why would we ascribe that to Jews? Makes no sense whatsoever. Incredibly weak. And you can just see it in real time. I just need to come up with something to excuse Trump rather than just say, yeah, those comments really were wildly inappropriate. Really wish Donald Trump would stop saying that because it doesn't help. It only hurts. It's also inherently bigoted. Also, to Jessica Tarlov's point, because we see this a lot, that centrist and mainstream media make a big deal, as well they should, about the fact that the Democratic Party is struggling with male voters. That is true. And that is a problem because it could have an effect on the election. But by that same standard, the problems that Republicans have with women is even worse, right? As the New York Times recently pointed out, Harris and Walz have a giant polling lead among young women, significantly higher than Trump's and Vance's lead with young men. The gender gap is worse for Republicans with women than the gender gap is with Democrats and men. It's bad with Democrats and men, and Democrats need to try to appeal to men and try to expand the Democratic coalition. But by that same metric, Republicans have an even bigger problem and should have even more incentive and more criticism put on them. Like, hey, Republicans, what the hell are you doing? Why are you driving so many women? You're driving women away more than Democrats are driving away men. And if we're going to pick on Democrats for driving away men, which again, fair enough, then we got to pick on you even more for driving away women. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to appeal to women? And the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance do not have a satisfying answer to that effect. And given that women not only constitute a majority of this country by gender, right? There are more women in this country than men. They're also more reliable voters than men. So again, Trump can still win this election. Again, the polls are tightening, my friends. I mean, there have been a bunch of right-wing BS polls, but also, more reputable polls as well, showing a closing gap. We cannot be complacent about this. Make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you have a plan to vote. There's no divine providence here that's going to save the country from a second Trump administration. There's going to be no miracle in this respect. Donald Trump is not going to decide to drop out of the race. He's going to see this to the very end. And he has a radicalized base. Are they a majority? No. But that means that while his ceiling is much lower than Vice President Harris's, his foundation is much higher. Donald Trump prophesied this years ago when he said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. That is the case. Vice President Harris can win more people over than Trump can, but she can also demotivate or drive people away or not inspire them enough. And I want to say this because this is something I've been going back and forth with people on Twitter. Voting and the electoral process with respect to voting really is a two-way street. It is the Democrats' job to try to appeal to as many voters as possible and not rest on their laurels. So if I'm the candidate, I have an obligation. I have a moral and civic obligation to try to persuade you to vote for me. That's my burden. That's my duty. Okay, that's one. But as eligible voters, you should vote in your rational self-interest and in the interest of your community. You should take into account what you need as a person and also what the people around you need and what the country needs, right? So there's you, there's your community, and then there's the country writ large. You also have an obligation. We as voters, I'm an eligible voter, not a candidate. We also have an obligation to turn up and turn out. It is a two-way street. There is moral agency and culpability in all of this, as far as I'm concerned. And so I'm not going to wag my finger and say, oh, Harris is perfect and, it's really all on you. I'm saying she needs to continue to try to win over as many voters as possible. Ineligible voters, in my opinion, should turn up anyway, because there is no timeline in the multiverse where Vice President Kamala Harris and the Democrats are worse than Donald Trump and Republicans. There's not a single pet issue to you, unless you're like a multimillionaire. Then yeah, you should probably vote for Donald Trump because he's going to cut your taxes. But if you're working and middle class and lower class, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, if you are the vast majority of this country, your vote would be better ascribed to Vice President Kamala Harris, because there's no issue, domestic or foreign policy, where she's worse than Trump. It's just the truth. So anyway, coin flip election. There's still some things going in the vice president's direction. It's good to see that Jessica Tarlov is there to put some very important and very triggering fact checks to her MAGA co-host and even the MAGA host of the panel, who's just supposed to be asking questions, but is so transparently in the bag for Donald Trump that facts trigger Martha MacCallum so much. Great performance by Tarlov. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.